Chapter 4, Caring for Children with Special Medical Conditions. So let's start out with services for children who have been diagnosed with special needs. And two laws address these issues. It's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. And both of these laws require that people with special needs have an equal opportunity and access to everything that everyone else has opportunity and access to. And specifically in education, there are certain opportunities and accesses that are provided by law. The first one is that education should be provided in the least restrictive environment for the child, or the best environment for them to learn. And in special ed, it's important that we know the acronyms or abbreviations for all of these legal requirements, and this one is LRE. The second one is free and appropriate education, which just means that in public education, a family can't be required to pay extra money for services provided to their child, and that is FAPE, or FAPE. And then an individualized education program should be provided for each child so that their individual education needs can be met, and this is an IEP. And then there should be an individualized health service plan if they have special health needs, and that's an IHSP. And so when it comes to service formats then, we provide services for children with special needs in either self-contained classrooms, which would include only children with special needs like themselves, or other types of special needs. And then mainstreaming, which means allowing them to participate with children in a typically developing classroom, or reverse mainstreaming, where children from the regular classroom comes into the self-contained special education classroom, and then resource classrooms. And this is usually for children with learning disabilities like reading disabilities or math, and then also for children with speech and communication disorders. Today, the preferred method of providing services is with inclusion, and this is the most current type of service that we provide. And this is a philosophy and practice where children of all abilities are included and integrated into the same classroom. This provides opportunities for all children to learn and collaborate together. It provides peer role models for children with special needs, and it requires all educators to make sure they're educated and skilled in meeting the needs of all children. And that's why it's really important that all people who provide services for children, whether they be typical or atypical, they need to make sure they have special training in special education. And at Rio Hondo, we have two classes on that topic. We have CD 226, which is Introduction to Special Education, and then we have CD 232, which is Educating Children with Special Needs. And this is more focused on IEPs and classroom, more details on classroom services. And then on page 84 of your book, you can see all of the different types of special needs categories. So make sure you take a look at that so you know the different areas where services might need to be provided. So why do we provide early identification and intervention? Well, early identification of children's health conditions requires a basic understanding of children's development and common health disorders, and an awareness of high-risk child populations. It also requires knowledge of information and service resources that can assist schools in addressing children's special health care needs. So one area that would require special attention would be childhood allergies. So 13% of children who experience respiratory allergies are non-Hispanic white children, 10% are non-Hispanic black children, and 9% are Hispanic children. So children living in the southern part of the United States are more likely to have respiratory allergies. And children who have poor or fair health are 3 times more likely to develop respiratory allergies. One of the disadvantages of having respiratory allergies is that it's the leading chronic disease for young children in the U.S. today. It's an ongoing issue. So most of the time, these childhood allergies are hereditary. We don't outgrow them, and they're classified according to the allergen or substance that triggers a reaction in the individual. And unfortunately, they can't be cured. Treatment is aimed at reducing exposure and controlling the reactive symptoms. So the classifications of the source of allergies, there are 4. Ingestants, and these are foods and medicines that can cause digestive and respiratory issues. Inhalants, which would be pollens, dander, and chemicals, and this would cause respiratory issues. Contactants, which would be touching something like a plant or applying a cosmetic or latex or fabrics, and this causes rash, hives, and eczema. Or injectables, which come from bites, stings, and injected medicine, and this could cause digestive, respiratory, and skin issues. So allergies can affect children's behavior and interest in learning, and so they must be identified and treated. And just keep in mind that they're not feeling well, they're congested, they maybe can't hear, they can't breathe. And so teachers play an important role in observing children for signs of possible allergies. So on page 87, it gives you a list of indicators that might help you be more observant in looking for childhood allergies. And then it lists for you on page 88 foods that are common causes of allergies. And then on page 89, it gives you a list of the symptoms of anaphylactic shock, and this is something that happens in the case of severe allergies. And some of these symptoms are wheezing and difficulty breathing, swelling of the lips, tongue, and throat, itching and hives, anxiety and restlessness. So those are some of the symptoms that you might find. So childhood asthma is another issue. 1 in every 11 U.S. children younger than 18 have been diagnosed with asthma. Boys and non-Hispanic black children experience the highest asthma rates. Children who are in poor health and or living in poverty are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with asthma. And on page 91, you can find some triggers that might cause asthma, such as allergies, certain foods, secondhand smoke, even cologne and perfume or air fresheners may cause asthma. And so here you have a chart that shows you percentages by age, by sex, by race and ethnicity. And so children are more likely to have asthma than adults. And then here you can see that males and female comparison, and then white, black, and Hispanic comparisons. So again, with asthma, it has a strong hereditary predisposition. So if parents have allergies or asthma, uh, of course the children are more likely to inherit them. It affects twice as many boys as girls. And in the chart before, we noticed that that seems to contradict, but that's not looking at child and adult separately. That's looking at them combined. It's often seen in children who also have respiratory allergies, and it's increasing and thought to be related to environmental factors such as airborne allergens, secondhand smoke, and that secondhand smoke, if you live in an apartment building, may be coming from somebody else's apartment, but it still affects your child. And early feeding practices like giving an infant cereal in a bottle can cause asthma. So what happens in asthma? An acute asthma attack makes it difficult for a child to breathe and may be triggered, as we mentioned, by uh, allergens, but it can also be triggered by temperature changes, like if it's been really hot, if it all of a sudden is very cold or all of a sudden very hot, or it can be caused by stress or by infections. And you can see it shows us what happens in an asthma attack, how the bronchial tubes become congested and no air can get in. So treatment is aimed at preventing acute attacks, controlling exposure, and then relieving symptoms. And so what kind of measures can teachers take if a child begins to have an asthma attack? And you can find this on page 92 of your text. It lists a bunch of things like encourage the child to remain quiet, administer any kind of medications that are prescribed for them, offer them sips of room temperature liquids, not cold liquids. And so there's a whole list of things you can do out there on page 92. Another health issue is anemia. And you can see in this picture below blood cells. This is a blood disorder that reduces the number and ability of red blood cells that carry oxygen to the body tissues. And on page 92, it talks about the factors that may cause this condition to develop. And on page 93, it gives you a list of signs that a teacher may be likely to observe in a child who has anemia, such as pale skin, irritability, rapid heartbeat, loss of appetite. Childhood cancers. Although cancers are the leading cause of childhood death from disease, they're still quite rare. Only 1 or 2 children per 10,000 will develop cancer in a given year. We're getting better at diagnosing and treating cancer in children. And some warning signs you can see on page 94 in regards to cancer. So painful joints, night sweats or fevers, headaches, lumps or masses, seizures. And on page 95, it gives you some suggestions of what you can do to support children in the classroom who have cancer. That's on page 95. So diabetes, approximately 1 in every 400 to 600 children have type 2 or type 1 diabetes, which has been the typical childhood version of diabetes, and this is just not enough insulin produced by the body. But we have a new type of diabetes that used to be just an adult version of diabetes, but has now become epidemic in children. Approximately 30 to 50% of children under the age of 18 are currently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And this is often associated with being overweight or obese. And that's the issue, is that as adults, we're not monitoring children's lifestyles appropriately, and they're not getting enough nutritious food and enough exercise. And so American Indian, African American, Mexican American, and Pacific Islander youth are at the highest risk for developing diabetes in the United States. And one of the profoundly disturbing aspects of diabetes in children is that it's not a slow onset, but it's a really abrupt onset. So it happens all of a sudden. So what we want to make sure we do is that we look for the early signs of diabetes, and you can see that on page 96 and in children, and that's something we haven't been looking for in the past, so we want to make sure that we pay attention to those now, such as rapid weight loss, frequent urination, blurred vision, dehydration, excessive thirst or hunger. And early diagnosis and treatment is essential to reduce the long-term health complications. And that's one of the dilemmas we have today, is since type 2 diabetes in children is such a new occurrence, we really have no idea the long-term health complications for children who develop it so early in life in comparison to adults that develop it in adulthood. Weight management is really important. Dietary intake and physical activity levels must be monitored carefully. And on page 98, you have some suggestions for in the classroom with children who have diabetes. You want to make sure you have emergency numbers near the phone. Be mindful of any changes in meal schedules or outdoor play or field trips that might affect insulin levels. And something to keep in mind with type 2 diabetes is it's not so much insulin levels that's the issue. For type 2 diabetes is that the cells in the body don't react to insulin in the way they should, and so they can't absorb it, and that means that blood sugar is not regulated effectively. And blood sugar that's too high or too low can cause organ damage. Lead poisoning is another issue. So non-Hispanic black children are more likely than other children to have elevated lead levels. Children 2 to 4 years of age are at a greater risk for developing lead poisoning. And so why are these two groups at increased risk? Well, it can have to do with, for the non-Hispanic black children, is the areas where they might live may have lead paint on the walls, or they may live in an area where there's oil production and oil pumps, and that means there's more lead in the soil. Also, children 2 to 4 tend to put things in their mouth more often, and so they may be eating dirt that may have lead in it, and they may also be eating paint chips with lead in it. So the incidence of lead poisoning has been steadily decreasing as sources have been identified and eliminated. And so on page 101, you can see some of the common sources of lead. Elevated blood lead levels cause a variety of physical symptoms as well as learning and behavior problems, and you can find that on page 100. Irritability, listlessness, constipation. And then some sources of environmental lead that you found on page 101 might be contaminated drinking water, folk remedies and medications, fishing weights, having a parent that works around motor vehicle batteries, imported toys, metallic trinkets, and some candies that come from foreign countries. So approximately 2 million people in the United States, about 1 in 100, have experienced a seizure or been diagnosed with a seizure disorder. So 300,000 are children under the age of 14 in the United States. So children who have neurological or genetic disorders such as cerebral palsy, fetal alcohol syndrome, or Down syndrome are at a higher risk of also experiencing seizures. And you can find other causes of seizures on page 102, like fevers, tumors, head injuries, medical reactions to medications. So there are essentially 4 types of seizures. There's the febrile seizure, which is usually caused by fevers, and it causes loss of consciousness and involuntary body jerking. Absent seizures, and these, you can find more about those on page 102. This is a momentary lapse of attention. It kind of looks like the person's daydreaming. And this can cause problems in a classroom if you're a school-age child. If you have absent seizures, you're going to miss what's going on in the classroom, and people may not notice the reasons why. Partial seizures, these are the most common, where there's involuntary body movements ranging from weak muscles to arm waving. Hysterical laughter, involuntary jerking, and this jerking may be full body jerking. And then the last one is tonic-clonic seizures, and this is rhythmic involuntary jerking, full body. It may also cause rigidity and stiffness, which is the tonic aspect of it. And the tremors and convulsions are the clonic part of this, the name of the type of seizure. So most seizures last less than 2 minutes, although if you're an observer or someone with a seizure, it seems much longer than that. But call immediately for emergency medical assistance if the seizures last longer than 5 minutes, or if the child has difficulty breathing after the seizure, or this is the first seizure that's ever been observed that they've had. And after a seizure, make sure you observe the child closely for their breathing, enroll them to a recovery position when the seizure is over. And you can find more information about seizure management on page 103.